Hello, hello everyone. Today is April 21st. This is a SIG release meeting that is recorded and available on the internet, so please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and in general, just be awesome people. So today we are going to talk about one email. We only have one topic on the agenda, and that's to discuss the changes to the potential changes to the release timeline. So last night we made an announcement, and it's kind of born from a lot of the different conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks, as well as some or several people reaching out to discuss. So we wanted to walk through a few of those changes, as well as get your feedback on things that we could change within that timeline. So if you want the TLDR in schedule form, it's in the PR that's in the agenda. I'm going to pop that in the Zoom chat as well. And all right, so first thing that we are planning to do, actually, Mo, do you want to kick us off? Because I know that you had some questions about this from the SIG chairs meeting, and I want to try to address your stuff first.
I mean, I can. Do you want to like try to frame what it is you guys are trying to do first, with the assumption that maybe not everybody read the email yet?
Fair. uh, so this cycle or this year is kind of an unprecedented time for everyone, and we wanted to recognize that, and we wanted to try to make the release more accommodating for everyone, and little tweaks to the processes and procedures that we have in place today. So there is some extension of certain aspects of the release. There are changes to what we will and won't accept for exceptions, which is not necessarily well defined, um, but hopefully hopefully some of the things that we've made changes to are some of the things that we're proposing changes to will allow people to release less content, more stable content, as well as kind of keep their eye on the 119 release instead of focusing on 119 and 120 simultaneously. So any questions on that before I kick it back to Mo? Okay, Mo, go for it.
Okay. So I think my general question had been is, so I read over your email and tried to sort of digest the intent of the changes, which is I think to try to sort of be more cognizant of the not tech changes of the world, uh, which I appreciate. I guess what I've been struggling with is I'm trying to understand sort of why like Kubernetes needs a 119 release right now, like within the next few months. Um, and like I mean that more in the perspective of like not the core contributors. Like I understand like Google, VMware, Red Hat, all of us have like the ability to just sort of work from home and are like much better capable of handling this current crisis. So I think we can accommodate ourselves and sort of continue on. But if I think of it more as like a downstream thing, I'm just trying to understand like why in the next few months do we need basically the same release cadence with a few extra weeks maybe, right? Like so like my internal mental map would be, why could we not just do 119 when we would have done 120 and just leave this space as a, well, if you want to work on something you can, but if you're in a situation where you're incapable of working on it, just don't worry about it, you're not missing anything. And if you're a downstream consumer of our releases, doesn't matter, no big deal. You don't have to worry about 119. Whenever the 119 images come out, it will be a few months later, and hopefully our hospitals are less overwhelmed and the world is a little nicer. That's basically what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's hard in insofar as we we don't really pump the brakes at the end of a release, right? So like there has been consistent content being pushed to master since 118 went out, right? All content that is on the table for 119. So I think it's hard. We were kind of kicking this around as well as we were thinking about these changes. What would it look like if there was more of a break in front of the release cycle or at the back end of the release cycle, right? And given that we, and so in the email we had discussed, what would it look like to push this release back a little bit, right? At least till the end of April, maybe early May. Um, and you kind of can't because it's on. Master is on all the time, right? So there's content constantly being pushed to it. So I think that, and it had been my hope for a few years now, actually, that the I guess it's a few years now, that more of the time in between releases would be spent resting, planning, doing triage, roadmap planning, all of that good stuff. Um, and it's, as well as formulating the release team itself, right? That's something that we kind of do during the cycle. Um, well, that we finish doing during the cycle, right? So short version is I don't have a good answer for you outside of the fact that we have already been pushing content related to it. And I think that trying to explain all of that to downstream consumers would be difficult.
So I guess what I would ask is, no matter what, right now, when you're pushing content, that content must sort of be compatible with what you could ship in 119, right? So you can't sort of break something that like isn't deprecated, and it must be like you have to follow all the standard timelines for adding things and removing things to the Kubernetes release, right?
Right.
So if you extend 119, that in essence, at least from our API level, guarantees a set of changes that you cannot do, right?
What do you mean by that?
Like you cannot add a brand new API that's like, a brand new custom REST API and call it beta, right? It has to go through alpha to beta, and like you have to
Yeah.
give it time, right? And to me, like having these two cycles still encourages that same mentality, right? Like I must always put something into the release because at each boundary I get to do something better, right? I get to push something forward, right? That's the bit that I would want to try to discourage, right? Like that's the part that I would actually want to slow down.
And I think that's a general ask. In talking with the release team last yesterday, as well as kicking ideas around with Jordan, that's what we want. We want people to slow down. So I think that one of the things that we need help with is to kind of ship that message to all SIG chairs, and for SIG chairs to kind of let that message trickle down their SIG, like try to slow down on feature development, try to work on stability instead. So yes,
So
uh
if I can comment there, I think most point is a lot of our policies around deprecation and everything are all written around releases. And by having a release, we are actually saying that you have an opportunity to deprecate or advance something from alpha to beta. Whereas if we didn't have a release, there wouldn't be that opportunity. So it automatically it's not just sending a signal at that point. It's actually putting an enforceable policy and saying you can't make certain kinds of changes. Um, so it's a somewhat stronger, boundary. My only concern, Mo, around not having a 119 is that even if there are plenty of changes that can be done that don't change APIs that add risk, and accumulating more changes accumulates more risk around that sort of thing. So you know,
I mean, but to be fair, though, like I'm not saying turn CI off, right? Like CI should always be green and do all the standard stuff, right? Like if our CI doesn't catch things that we break, then we're basically saying that our customers will, and that's just not like a great place to be, right? So, but I do understand that if we have a longer release, we will push, like we will like accidentally put more stuff in it just because we have more time. All right.
Right.
And I am cognizant of that and don't necessarily know how to incentivize humans not to do that. I just know I can incentivize people not to try to move APIs and boundaries and deprecations, right? Like I know like SIG auth wants to like V1 the CSR API, right? Because we're supposed to get rid of our beta APIs and do all that, and we wanted to do that in 119, and we'll try to push for that and all those things, right? But at the same time, I don't know if it's like the most critical thing in the world at this exact moment in time. Like, Jordan,
Yeah,
you're here. You can
definitely.
comment since you're working on it.
Yeah, I think trying to sort of split the difference and give a schedule that leaves room for contributors, which is what this was trying to do, to say, like, people have already made 119 plans, so if we can allow them to execute those, but then give them buffer, so we're not jumping right into 120 at the end of that, to give contributors some buffer. And then by adding that buffer before 120 kicks off, that the intent of that was to give time to get feedback on the release candidates, give time for consumers who are stretched and aren't ready to pick up a 119 like the second it comes out on the normal schedule. I think part of it too is we don't know what the world's going to look like in 2 or 3 months. And so saying we're going to skip a release and push everything back 3 months does accumulate more risk. And it's kind of unclear what that does to all the things that were planned for 119. Like, do we put more in the release? Do we, like, what happens if we just say the 119 release is now 6 months long?
Yeah, I mean, like if we don't change like timings much, like do we need to have like a strong policy on all you can do is like stability work, like, and have to actually define what stability work is, right? Like if there's no crisp definition, right? Like what work is okay to go in, right?
I mean, when we were talking yesterday, the thing that was coming to my mind was the urgent must read before upgrade. You know, as part of deploying this release, you must make these changes or these adjustments or whatever. Like in the abstract, I would like that section of the release notes to be empty for this next release, so that additions, you know, like the CSR API going to V1, ingress going to V1, like these are additional things, but they don't affect existing APIs. These are
Graduation,
things like that. But if you're using the beta APIs, you don't have to change to deploy this this version. That's sort of the general guidance I would ask the SIG leads and TLs to be focused on. Like, if you're doing stability stuff, if you're moving features along their roadmaps, that seems good and reasonable. If you're doing something that's going to require people to react, that's a much bigger thing to ask people to do if they're under pressure rolling these releases out.
So given that we have a few, that's kind of interesting, given that we have a few of the SIG architectural folks on the call, what do y'all think of that? Actually, what if we were to freeze deprecations for a cycle?
Well, I mean, freezing deprecations, it's the removal that's the issue, right? Like, deprecation is like 9 months in advance.
Right. So the actual removal.
Can I poke at freezing features? Like whatever KEPs have been already merged, those will go in. Like, give a deadline for end of this week. If something that doesn't get in, we don't work on it in 119.
I mean, that's what enhancements freeze is. I'm pretty hesitant to sort of arbitrarily, ahead of the schedule that people were expecting,
do something different.
Do something like that. Like what that will encourage is for people to rush designs in and merge them in less than complete states so that they can unblock themselves to do
James, you
things
just
like
really stress me out, man. Like my blood pressure is going up. I'm stressing out.
How do we stop people from working other than shutting off master, right? That's the question there.
well,
And we have successfully done it in code freeze. And
I mean, I don't. Do we need to stop everybody from working, right? We need to stop people from doing certain kinds of changes.
right. So
that was pretty much the intent of the proposal that Steven sent out, which was don't freak people out who have already planned work over a normal 119 timeframe. But at the end of that, like give them a buffer, give us time to run soak tests, give us time to get extra feedback on the release candidates, give people who are going to be consuming it a breath. And so like it was trying to balance easing contributor load and easing consumer load without doing this last minute, like, oh, just kidding, get all your designs for 119 in 3 weeks before you thought you were going to have to, and like this scramble. Like we're trying to avoid scrambles.
maybe we can make it retroactive, right? As of last week, Friday.
All of your enhancements were due. I'm sorry, that's what's going on.
Like a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, so
Man.
That is something that kind of happens, though. I mean, enhancements freeze doesn't mean everything has always been automatically approved for the release. The enhancements team does look through and question things. So that questioning could happen a little more critically with a little more pushback, a little more going out and talking to owners and the associated chairs, reviewer approvers, and saying, this one, it's making my blood pressure go up. This one's making Mo's blood pressure go up. Maybe, how horrible would it be if we deferred this one to later?
Right, and that's why I was
with
trying to
some serious conversations like that. Like, it's one thing for those of us in this meeting here, which is like very much a tiny subset of the community, and especially the leadership and owners who would be making the choices on what merges. If we're going out a little more targeted with some aggression, like, come on, people, let's chill this release out.
So
I'd like to think we could succeed at that.
Yeah. My feeling is, what I want to do is I want to like stop everybody from doing work and write tests for all the things that are broken and the CI jobs that are broken, get things back, reduce the flakiness, pay down some of the debt that we have accumulated. That's what I want to do, to be clear.
So, I mean, so here's the thing, like we can't stop feature work. Like we have never had the stick to stop merges altogether, right? We have merge restrictions in place. So this is the kind of the idea of like the back half of the cycle when code freeze turns on, code freeze will stay on. Essentially the merge restrictions around code freeze. So you will need to apply a milestone and it'll need to obviously be approved by the people who can approve it. So this is like really, and that'll stay on until post release, right? So the idea is that like, please only do 119 right now until 119 is out of the door, then start on 120, which gives you some opportunity to do some prep work in the meantime, right? So whether it's enhancements, whether it's doing, doing bug triage, maybe it's writing a roadmap, maybe it's, I don't know, right? But we felt that, this is the kind of splitting the difference that Jordan was talking about. We felt it was weird and kind of disingenuous to try to move timelines that had already existed, or timelines that were close that had already existed. So with enhancements freeze, we did move that out a week, but we tried not to shift any of the timelines in the front half of the cycle, where more of the changes are happening post code freeze, right? So so we're going to continue some of the, maybe it makes sense now to go through the email in painful detail. but I do agree that if we can do less features, that would be great. Again, this is a message that we would have to ship to the SIG tech leads and chairs, to the people who are doing approvals for enhancements, to the people who are doing approvals for Kubernetes, right? If the message is try not to get it into 119 unless it absolutely needs to be in 119, that's a message that every approver needs to carry, right? Because if they're preventing the work from getting in, then that's kind of the enforcement. It's unfortunately it's a human enforcement as opposed to a mechanical one, but it is there, right? Or it is there. Um, but yeah, let's go through the email. Okay. So
Before you jump in, you're talking about mechanical enforcement, and the category I was thinking of was the like the action required release notes. I mean, we do have a label for that. I don't. It's probably applied inconsistently, but if we discuss with the SIG leads and say like to make 119 as consumable as possible on whatever time frame we end up releasing it, we would like to avoid having action required release notes. Like we would like to make this a consumable release that doesn't require reaction by people who are consuming it. That is a thing that we could query on and say, you know what, if you've got an action required PR, like we want to make sure this should go into 119. It shouldn't be automatic or something. I don't know. That's just an idea.
My brain is cynical on that, but I actually feel like watching things go by in the last year and a half on the patch release team, people aren't abusing labels generally on marking these things, and that's a nice sign of our community culture.
So there are two things. How many things? Let's figure out. One thing is reduce the load on contributors, then reduce the load on reviews and approvers, and reduce the load on people who will be downloading and using our releases. Are those the three sets of people that we are trying to address here?
Yeah, I think you hit it.
So are we covering all those three in the time frame, do you think, Stephen?
I think we're trying to. I think we're definitely trying to. It's tricky to kind of bullet point all of the things that a consumer needs, outside of the release eventually, right? If someone is waiting to upgrade, and they're forecasting that 119 is going to come out in 3 months, then there's some expectation that we're going to deliver it around that time, right? But yeah, I think it's hard to catch all of this stuff in a bucket. So
right. For example, right, Klog V2. If we get that going, then people have to make code changes. People who are consuming us as a library will have to make code changes, right? That's one aspect. The other one is people who deploy our code, right? So there's at least two categories of people there: people who consume our code as well as people who deploy our code.
Yeah, if I could say that was one of my concerns when it was just a 3-week push on the end. So we've been talking a lot about the contributor approver side, with enhancements freeze and when it happens and things like that. But your point, Dim's like the consumers, meaning the end users who are running clusters and who are sitting there on a version that when 119 comes out is all of a sudden out of support. Those are the people I'm most concerned about, because then they're, the people who are going to upgrade to 119 actually aren't that much of a concern to me, because they're kind of bleeding edge, right? Like it's the people who already have a difficult time keeping up with this pretty strenuous release train, and now are in a situation where they don't have the resources to do it, and they're going to fall out of support. So I think we need to, I think there's still a unmerged PR out there about the 1-year support. And then the question is, if we only push it 3 weeks, then we're only giving 3 weeks more time before something falls out of support.
So let's noodle on that, John. So if we say that we suppose the LTS stuff gets in and we do 4 months.
Tim's,
Yes.
hang on for a second, because I know this is going to become big. Mo has his hand up though, so
Okay.
let's give him a second and then we'll come back.
Yeah, all I wanted to ask is, so like, I think the bit that Jordan mentioned about the release note required, I think is really important. Or sorry, not action required is really important, because that one, we have a label we can track pretty easily, and we can try to, even if like, even if something got in and then at the end of the release we were trying to write an action required, we could be like, maybe we should just revert that and not put it in this release, right? We have a lot of sort of functionality there. I guess what I don't understand is, like, that doesn't necessarily correlate exactly with like feature work, right? Like you could be messing with APIs, adding new ones, moving them across boundaries. And that might not require like an action required, but it does like add stuff. Like, you're adding some inherent risks by adding code. So like are we wanting to try to quantify that in some way? Or are we going to like try to say that we need really strong isolation with some kind of feature gate or something? Like do we need something more than what we would already do? Like if we added like a new like alpha feature, we would obviously gate it behind something to make it not run, but do we need something more? That's kind of what I was thinking. Or maybe it's just that you can't add a new alpha feature. That might be a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, one, again, I don't think we have a way to block that today outside of the discretion of the reviewers and approvers. But two, in this proposal, we wanted to try to not add new things, new levers, bells and whistles, and try to work within much of what we have as an existing process today and see if we can flex it, bend it, break it a little bit to fit. I feel that the an attempt to one, apply more enforcement, as well as kind of flip the script on people and redocument some of the existing policy would be a little bit too much, especially given that we have already started the cycle, right? And sorry that doesn't really solve things. I think that like we're dealing with and I feel like this is, ever since I've like started in Kubernetes, this has kind of been a thing on the table, that we don't have levers to block things like this, right? So maybe this is an opportunity to consider it throughout the cycle. I don't think it's something that we should implement during the cycle, though.
Stephen, but the issue also is there is a lot of inbuilt problems for people trying to get code in. This is not talking about just right now. We're just talking about normal cycle without COVID. And it's extremely hard for people who are not full-time contributors to get anything in. So adding more barriers might feel good right now, and it might work for the COVID situation, but when we get back out, it's going to become even worse situation than we were before.
Yeah, I don't disagree there at all. I think that anything that we implement now has a potential to stay. So it makes it very, so we're trying to tiptoe around a lot of this and make sure that we don't impact anything negatively. One thing I wanted to toss out into the air is that something to consider, and I think Tim was mentioning this before on previous calls, or maybe Zoom, maybe Slack chats or something. There are some people that, so there are two categories. There are some people that can't not work right now, like they have to deliver certain things right now, and there are some people that may be working even more as a coping mechanism, right? So I like, we want to give some deference to that stuff too, without, again, mangling people's workflows too much. So sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but so let's one of the reasons that we did the extension as well is we're starting to talk about the stability releases. We're continuing to talk about the LTS timeline, right? And yeah, Tim, this is coming back to your point. Yeah, we did not. Sorry, you're on mute.
We need to get back to John's thing, and then we can go to
Okay.
the schedule. Is that okay?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the thing with what John was mentioning was, if we tack on an additional stable release, so we don't let people fall off the wagon on the other side, right? The older releases who we basically stop supporting. What is the cost there? Can we bear that cost instead of the other things that we'll be working on?
There's a KEP for that, and
I know.
everybody sort of said, "Yeah, we can." That working group was actually probably by the end of this week going to send out an email saying that we have loose consensus and believe this is now implementable, and put a lazy consensus deadline on merge.
Right. So if we do that, as in tack on an additional stable release, and then also say what Jordan was saying, like no action required, nobody has to do anything to do an upgrade for their existing clusters. If we do those two, then we will probably serve a whole bunch of end users, I think. And if we avoid breaking changes like the client Go stuff that happened, Klog v2 that is going to happen, then we'll address a few more sets of people who consume our code.
I think though that was going to happen anyway, right? Regardless of COVID. So we already knew that we had a problem, and we were solving the problem by extending that support cycle. And so that's not really providing additional relief, because people are actually in a worse situation than they were when that KEP was written. So I would still argue that a little further. What I'm trying to argue is that basically a further delay in 119, maybe not a whole skip like Mo is suggesting, but like 3 weeks doesn't seem like that much, honestly. And then the other levers, the things we're doing on the contributor side and the action required and all of that, is to reduce the risk that accumulates in that due to that extended time frame. That's kind of how I'm seeing it in my head.
Right. All I'm saying is we should just do that for sure, because not let it slide anymore, right?
Okay, so action item for SIG chairs, technical leads, review that KEP if you have not already. I think like Tim said, it's close, and it's been close for a while. But if you feel that KEP, smash that like button and subscribe, kind of thing. Yeah, no, I do think that's a great idea, and yeah, you're right. It's not specific to the situation, but it was something that was going to happen.
Random question: was there any thought given to actually extending the release cycle by for more than 3 weeks? I'm trying to do the math in my head, and that will possibly leave 15-week or so releases for the year, and then like some relatively long, awkward point a cycle in the year that is not enough for an actual release. So like, what about extending it for 6 weeks or something else to actually allow for people to and also to go to Tim's point, be more stringent about enhancements, work on enforce, ask for end-to-end test, and take time to actually create the tools and the tools that we need to be more confident about the things that are going to go into Kubernetes.
So my question would be, how long is long enough, right? Where is the line between? I'm not saying that I don't disagree. My first thought was make this at least a 4-month release cycle and add more of a break in between, right? But where do we say that that's fine? right? I think that's difficult to do. I do think that it's more possible, given that we're at the beginning of a release cycle, to plan a 120 with that kind of buffer. But yeah, I mean, I would be curious if people want more than, yeah, it's kind of like 6 of a dozen, you know. So like I would be curious where would people be happy with, right? We felt that like the 3-week line was allowed us to push more time into the additional RCs that we've added at the back end of the release. Hopefully giving people time to test and let that stuff soak. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's a good answer. Like I think that we could potentially, Tim, I'm gonna shut up.
So I think one way to answer Jorge's question is, like, we've been talking about this for years, even unrelated to the current thing. What's the right cycle? 3 months, there's no magic to 3 months. Mo, I think originally last week basically was kind of saying, like, could we just skip it? Could it come out at the next one? So making this one a 6-month cycle. So we've bounced it back and forth. There's a lot of hesitancy to do a longer elongation for whatever that means in specific weeks or months. For kind of all the reasons that you've just been hearing over the last 41 minutes, that like there's this, we know we have unmanaged risk in the project. To go to Dim's statement around test coverage, quality, completeness, this is really complex, and we know from experience in software development that the longer the cycle, the more of that unmanaged risk starts to build up, and it does bite us. We might get lucky with once doing a 6-month release, especially in the current climate, especially with a lot of messaging around, let's just do a whole lot less of everything beyond stabilization. We might be able to get away with it.
So my biggest concern there is less so mechanical and actually doing the release, clicking the buttons. I think from like the release management side, that's those buttons aren't as terribly difficult to click as they used to be. But more so from the release team side, extending a release means we keep we keep 40 plus people on working for that release until X date, right? So I think 3 to 4 weeks is fine, or could be fine, but like 5-6 months, it doesn't seem as feasible.
We could be creative there. Like I think it's important, even though this is a SIG release meeting and we're sort of talking about starting the release cycle, it's important for us to separate the project and its consumers from the release team. If the project and its consumers need a longer cycle, the release team internally, we could figure out a way to make it 2 teams, some sort of roll on, roll off, spread the load, and we could make sure that we as a SIG release are not requiring everybody else in the Kubernetes universe to do things that are complicated, to avoid some complexity ourselves, which we could somehow manage probably if we were creative and not be adding to our own human toil.
I totally agree. At the same time, I want to make sure that that kind of change is strictly required before we go down that road.
But let's keep the conversation open instead of saying, like, if we go there, it's going to be hard for the team. Like we can
Right.
we can figure that hit out later if we feel the conversation has led us to wanting to do that.
Yeah. So let's look at the calendar and see if it actually fits in, right? With the dates and the months, in the weeks, how many weeks for what. And maybe we'll tack on a week or 2 there while we are talking through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to do it right now is shove more weeks in between the RCs. That's essentially what we did to elongate the schedule anyway. My initial thought was to essentially take all of the dates and shift them out a month, right? And then add more. And we kind of didn't want it to, I think very specifically Jordan didn't want to do this because of, one, the code freeze date, right? So shifting all of the dates back a month kind of encourages that additional that additional risk, that 30% or so potential more things to land. Yeah, Mo has his hand up.
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to understand. So we seem kind of comfortable with like a 3-week shift, but not a 3-month shift, right? Like I think that's what I'm getting, right? Like 3 months is too far. 3 weeks might be okay. Like where's the optimal in there for what we feel is?
I think that.
Oh,
I
that's
think
what I was
the
asking
issue-
you.
Yeah, I think the issue is that we're trying to balance different priorities. So with the 3-month, like there's the consumers, those downstream people, the end users running clusters. For them, a longer delay is better. But for purely from the sense of like they're not forced into action. The the tension for the shorter one is that we don't want to accumulate risk, and so I think the 3 weeks is too far pushed towards the not accumulating risk, in my opinion, and that we need. It's all just a judgment call, like Steven said. None of us can really know what's best, but in my judgment, like giving it more like 6 weeks ish would give. That's like a real relief on the end consumer side, as opposed to 3 weeks, which is not all that much different to me. And then we took the other levers that we've talked about to address the risk accumulation. You know, the no action required and all of that.
Right.
And it's a question of where you put the extra time. Do you put the extra time in the dev cycle or in the code freeze portion of the cycle?
Yeah, and for me, one of the things is like we always say the .0 release, nobody should use it, right? Nobody literally uses it. Everybody waits for the .1 release because we keep making changes till the last minute. So it might be that is one thing that we can ensure that this time a .0 release is definitely something that we'll be happy with.
Yeah, I think that I think that one thing I would like to see at the back end of the cycle is like less surprises. And adhering to the cherry pick deadline. I don't think we've managed to do that in the last few cycles. And I mean, of course, that's because someone has found some late stage terrifying bug and fixed it. But but it would be nice to see a long period of settle time to allow RC3 to look like what .0 is going to look like. So I mean, I think I'm fine to add more time in between the RCs, maybe even add another RC for whatever that's worth, and keep the same amount of time, right? That adds an extra 2 weeks, right? So that's not quite it, but there could be a wait period. We can play around with it. If people are saying that 6 weeks is preferable, we can start playing with the schedule.
To Jorge's question too, that also gives us sort of a path for like how this affects releases that come after it. Like if we look between now and the end of the year, like if like we're not setting precedent like for all time, like what we're going to do, but it is useful to think about like, okay, what does the next release look like? Like how do we bump up against holidays and stuff at the end of the year? And like 3 weeks does put the next release, if we extend 119 by 3 weeks, it does put the next release in kind of an awkward position where if it's a normal length release, then the fourth release of the year is basically like a month and a half. Like it's just crazy. If we actually bump it out 6 weeks, then we can basically split the difference and say like 119 is a relaxed timeline. If 120 does the same thing, then that rounds out the year, avoids the holidays, doesn't give us a crunch fourth quarter release, and then we can kind of reset or reevaluate, see what we want to keep or reset for 2021.
Right, Jordan. But there is this other idea we have always talked about, right? If we plan well now, we can say that 120 is going to be a stabilization release, and no features allowed, right? So period, right? We can
But
come up
James,
with
you have to
something like that now.
enforce that somehow more than you will hit you with a stick, right? It has to
I
be like
know, I know.
frozen.
Right. So that's a point. We can't do that for 119 now, but we can do that for 120.
I'm not sure that we can. I think it's very hard to bucket things into feature versus stability. Like a lot of the things going into 119 are graduating features that are already in progress. Is that something you would forbid, or is that stabilization?
I would say new caps, right? For example, we won't approve any new caps for one.
Okay, so just not to like put my own things first, but one of the caps that I have in 119 is a cap for surfacing information about use of deprecated things to users.
Right. I was talking about 120, not 119.
I know. I'm
Yeah.
just as an example, like
Right.
this is a thing that addresses a long-standing gap and actually improves user experience and helps them recognize risks that they have. But it's definitely a feature. I'm hesitant to just say no features at all for any reason. I think it has to be more of a like, is this a feature that requires a reaction? Is this a feature that introduces risk? And that gets more to what John has been doing with the production readiness stuff, like calling out the impact of a change and evaluating it on its merits. I'm in favor of understanding better the risks that are associated with enhancements and making decisions saying this one brings risk and we don't want risk in this release, so let's defer it.
Well, I think even more so, like all changes have the potential to bring risk. Is it acceptable risk, right, for us, right? But I do agree. Like Jordan, your cap is something I want to see in, and I think a lot of people want to see in. And yeah, I think it's tricky to say. Like we've had that issue open around discussing a stability release, and its milestone for 119. Funny enough, so so like it's definitely on the table right now. It's something that I personally don't think we're going to get until we have levers. And even then, I think like Jordan was saying, there's a lot of nuance between what is a feature, like, or what is something that overall like will improve our overall posture over time, right? I don't know is the short version.
To that point, something similar that comes to mind, blocking features, assuming that features were actually something very tangible and easy to define apart from all the caps. Will that be a healthy thing to do for the community? I imagine that there are a group of people that are not just contributing to Kubernetes in terms of I can do this and I can help out in this area, but they are strictly just focused on working on one particular thing because their job requires them to actually work on that, or for some other constraints. So blocking people for 3 months or longer, will that actually be something? Will that create a healthy environment in the community where people say, I want to keep on contributing? Open question. I really just want to throw it out there.
That's a tough one. And I think that ultimately, like, we're going to land in a compromise. There is no one solution that's going to solve everything for everyone. And I think that ultimately we need to take the needs of the many for whatever that's worth, instead of trying to identify contributors that are only, not saying that we necessarily need to identify every single one, like contributors that only work on a specific thing and they need that thing, right? Or they are slated to work on that thing for for work. I think that us saying that we have enacted new policy around slowdown and stability in general, I think, if I was working on a specific feature set and I had to take it back to my boss and say, well, Kubernetes has this new policy where we literally can't do anything right now. It's, I think if we can move that risk off of the individual contributor, we've done that by enacting a policy, but we do need to put it up in bright lights, the blink tags, marquee kind of situation somewhere, right, to make it very clear that this is what we're doing for 119 and maybe even 120. Again, not quite an answer, but, but
Let's do the easy stuff. Let's look at the schedule.
okay. Well, first question or one of many questions. Is anyone confused right now? Is there anything that we can help clarify? Like, have you read the email and you're still like there's something you want us to clarify? Okay. All right. Let's look at the let's look at the schedule. All right. So I will share my screen, and at least let's look at what we got today, so everyone is on the same page. And is that my computer freezing? Maybe. All right. So kind of in code form, what we are talking about in the email is moving enhancements freeze to week 5, moving all releases to Tuesday. There's no special reason for this outside of, because Ian actually asked me this last night. There's no special reason for this outside of the fact that a lot of the releases were already on Tuesdays. And I just kind of moved them in line so that we could have a strict 2-week or 1 week between certain releases. It's it's one of those things that happens to fall on like Patch Tuesday, but kind of my thought process was our general feeling for releases is like not Monday and not Friday, so everything else is kind of on the table.
Right. So the question here, Stephen, is moving the date for the enhancement freeze. Will it encourage people to add more enhancements or stabilize the enhancements that they already are working on in a better shape and form?
Sorry, my computer is doing stuff. Sorry, can you hear me, see me again?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So the idea behind enhancements freeze is we're simultaneously sending this email out, but we've also merged changes to the enhancements process, and we have another one inbound with the PRR template coming into the PRR questionnaire coming into the KEP template. So I think that it's not much, but it's a week to try to adjust to some of that stuff, maybe change into the new format. I don't think we're going to have a hard, we don't do any enforcement. Well, we do some enforcement on the KEP side, but I don't think we're going to strictly require, people have all of their KEPs in the new format before enhancements freeze. Like Mo was discussing this with us on the channel, or parts of this on the channel, enhancements channel last night. This is more of it's a little extra time, not to do more, but hopefully to firm up the things that you already have in place. But we can't guarantee that people won't try to do more with that time. By the way, I can keep going if people are interested, and so we have 1 minute. Yeah. So with regards to the schedule, my computer is doing awful things. I can't screen share, but right now we're saying RCs get released on a bi-weekly cadence. So that's week 9, week 11, week 13. The 119.0 release date is moved to week 15, right? And then the retro is moved to week 16, right? So overall, we're looking at around 4-month cycle. If we then add 4 more months to that for the fun of it, that's putting us in a little past November, right? Our end of November, early December.
So it feels like we should try to make sure that 120 will go out in December and try
Right.
to occupy the time in between.
Right. So August. Yeah, if we go for December and we go for an early December date, we go for, what if we were to say all of August is frozen or something, right? And land it directly in December, early December, right? That does give us 4 months of cycle again, right? And if we were to continue down this road, right, we have the benefit of the 4-month cycle actually adding a release to kind of the support window, I think, if I'm doing the math right. Not sure if that's a thing that we want to go for, but it's a thing that we could go for.
Can I ask for clarification? So you're suggesting, I'm trying to understand what you're suggesting. You're suggesting adding, making it the roughly 6 weeks and then doing the same for 120. So basically 2 more releases this year, 119 and 120 each. Is that what am I understanding correctly?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right. The other one that I would say, sorry, John, if you finished, please go ahead.
No. And then what you're saying is that that means that, and then the addition of that other PR for LTS means we'd actually have more than a year just for this short time period of these 2 releases that would kind of give us that extra buffer.
Right. And I mean, that's also assuming that we don't like this, right? Like, what if we find that the 4-month release cycle is the sweet spot, right? And then all of a sudden you've got 3 releases a year, and and you get a little extra support as a result of that, right? You get a quarter and change of support as a result of that.
Yeah. The other friction, Stephen, is we shouldn't shut down master for too long. It just adds too much churn on the PRs, and just rebasing hell is really hard on people who are trying to contribute. So we shouldn't make that too long.
If master is shut down, then there's actually not a lot of rebasing required. So the rebasing comes in when you have a long-standing PR and master is changing.
Well, that's true as well. Yeah.
I'm actually somewhat, like, we've talked about feature branch development. I know we're running over time. We've talked about feature branch development, and that's been very difficult actually, because most people don't do feature branch development. But if we had a longer period of freeze and then a shorter merge window for a given release, it would encourage people to work in branches, stack their PRs the way we do for API changes, where we get API implementation and tests, all green with a long CI pass history, and then you merge it as a piece, instead of trickling changes into master over a 2-month window that are incomplete, hoping you get the completing changes in like a month in the future.
Right. But Jordan, it's harder for non-full-time contributors to adopt to a feature branch mode, right? So that's the problem.
I don't think that's true. I think it's true today because master is always moving. But if master was generally stable and only things that were complete and ready were getting merged, I think feature branch development would actually be viable.
We can definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, I think we landed here yesterday too. Like there's differing opinions on that, and we can try it. And this is sort of a forced opportunity to try it.
If we succeed, it's to everyone's benefit, all of those individual developers and the project and any other open source project to which they might contribute, their employers. Like this would be a good thing to seed as a quality engineering practice.
Sounds
I did
good.
like that. I did like that sentiment yesterday in terms of, the mental model of this being, this is an experiment and we can figure out what works and what does not work. And I think that's, kind of +1 to all that was said in that, like, yeah, let's see what works for us and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that I think that hopefully things will start to become clearer as we gain this experience towards the back end of the cycle. I want to make sure that I agree, by the way. I am a little worried about, once code freeze starts, there are already 6 weeks between code freeze and master reopen, right? Um, I feel that may be long. Today, like if we're adding an additional 3 weeks, do we feel that that's too much? That was definitely a question for the audience.
No. 3 weeks. Oh, hey.
This is
We'll
3
survive.
weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll survive.
So I mean it's not, we're saying right now that we'd be okay with 9 weeks of master being shut.
Yeah.
Are we sure?
Now we wanted to encourage people to slow down.
Huh? I mean, like, this would definitely get people to slow down.
If you figure like a week or two to notice, optimistically, maybe 3, to notice that it's happened, a week to start your branch development, a week to go, whoa, gets confusing, 2 weeks to start to be like, oh, maybe I could deal with this, another week to be confident, like, there's your 9 weeks.
So okay, so no, but seriously, if we're gonna do that, and we think feature branch development is the remedy for people who are stuck, which it should be, then we probably should provide some guidance on how we expect people to do that. I mean, and when they go to merge those feature branches in, how clean they have to be and what they look like, and we probably should provide people some guidance so that they don't have to figure it out in those 3 weeks Tim's talking about.
Funny you should say that. In the Zoom chat, I've pasted a link for the discuss feature branches and forks issue. I'll also put that in the agenda. And if you have guidance that you'd like to give, feel free to pop it on that.
So my question, Stephen, is, do you have enough to iterate what you have, or did we confuse you even more than before?
I think we're close, and I think we came into this close. So like we kind of hammered on this all of yesterday to try to get something that was pretty close to shippable. I think we're there. The question I would have to people is, are we good from, because all of the stuff that we've been talking about has primarily been back half of the cycle, right? And that is that we have time to fix if we need to, right? Or tweak, whatever you want to call it. The front half, are we fine with that, right? Proceeding, essentially enhancements freeze is the only thing that gets shifted back a week, and proceeding as normal with the timeline up until code freeze. That's a yes from Dims. Mo, how you feeling?
Can you say it again? I was thinking about what you were saying, and then like I lost it. I was like,
because we were talking about multiple options, and in the minutes I tried to start making a table, I don't think it captures quite what everybody was saying, or there's consensus. So maybe Stephen, if you could share the minutes and show that, we could discuss some specific days, what it does.
I can't. My computer's gonna hang again. If you can do it,
can you bounce me hostability?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Steven, are you trying to use a Chromebook?
I am on an Ubuntu laptop.
Similar set of problems.
Yeah, it's like Zoom's gonna Zoom on Linux. Tim, you have co-host. Yep. So yeah, so Tim, do you want to walk through it? Sorry.
Well, pause to let people read that, I guess, first of all. And then I think especially on the 6 weeks column, like the normal column and the +3 weeks, those are what we have committed in the Git repo and what Steven's current PR changes to. That final column there is what we've been loosely discussing. And we hadn't largely said specific dates, so I was trying to pull those out of the air. So like pause and noodle on those, look at the calendar, think, and then rather me say anything, I'd rather y'all to express your thoughts.
I think we wanted, if we're going to add 6 weeks, we didn't want to just have I don't think we wanted to push code freeze. I see you're pushing code freeze, pushing the whole release 6 weeks and pushing the code freeze 3. No, I don't think we wanted to push code freeze out like that because then we're just going to accumulate.
We're encouraging more content. I think yesterday we discussed. Sorry, I'm getting an echo. Can someone mute?
John.
Okay. We discussed yesterday that we don't want to push code freeze because that encourages more content. We want to try to keep the dates as close as possible. In fact, in the schedule that you see on the PR, code freeze is pulled up 2 days, and that's literally just to get the releases in line on Tuesdays. But it can change back if we need it to. But yeah, I think the time needs to be added at the back of the release post code freeze. So this is saying, I don't know, we're doing 2 more RCs, or the cherry pick deadline is longer, or the cherry pick, the times that we're allowing cherry picks is longer, or something like that, right?
18th might be better.
So I'm trying to look at the dates on the +6 weeks. So you give folks until almost the end of May for enhancements, but then less than a month to do all of the work for those enhancements?
Well, the work is ongoing always, and this was about, I thought earlier we were saying like we want to have some conversation to decide should this really go in this release or should the work proceed towards delivery in the next release, in which case you have that much longer to accomplish it.
Yeah, so I think that that like Tim was saying, and if you're done with your KEPs, like you can get working, right? There's nothing preempting people from working before enhancements freeze passes. It's just, and I think that people take these boundaries to be hard boundaries, right? There is enhancements freeze, like you can deliver a KEP anytime before that, and I think everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But same for code freeze, right? No one has to drop it at the deadline, right? And we have a lot of that.
That's a problem.
So like James, you can go ahead.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? People wait till the deadline, and the day before the deadline, there's like a bunch of things go in, right? So we might as well pull in the May 22nd to a little bit earlier.
Yeah, like for me, like the thing I've noticed overall that's like a limiting factor, at least for SIG auth, is just bandwidth. Like there's a small set of us folks that work on this stuff. So like the deadlines are like a forcing function to like, okay, I have to review this enhancement now. Like it's been on my to-do list for the last 2 months. Right, Mo made it or Jordan made it way long ago, but like, I could put it off, so I did because boss told me to go do this other thing, and so I did, right? So like that would be my hesitation, right? Like, I have a KEP open right now. I'm working on changes to an existing KEP right now, right? Like part of the dates is just like I can be like, hey Jordan, hey Mike, please review, because otherwise it just won't make the release because I'm not going to merge it myself because that's ridiculous. That kind of defeats the point of making PRs.
I have one concern though, thinking from the everybody else perspective. They're like Mo's on top of stuff, he's paying attention, he's here. The other folks are still sort of waiting to hear what's going on with 119. We come to some consensus, we get an email out by Friday, they've read it, and they're like, whoa, wait a second, enhancements freeze is 2 weeks away. I only get 2 weeks this time for enhancements. Is that too short?
Right, but
We're starting late.
it's May 22nd instead of May 5th,
Yeah,
right?
we're
Oh, I'm
giving
sorry.
more time. We're giving more time.
We're
Yeah.
giving more time.
Yeah. May
We're giving
12th,
them
I
more
think,
time.
Yeah.
I was implicitly saying like if it was just 12, the 12th is almost only 2 weeks away.
Yeah, three weeks from today, I guess. So if it's if we send this out later in the week, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy if we squeeze in May 22nd, a few days earlier.
I think we should be giving more. Sorry, John, I had to mute you. I think we should be giving more time in the dev phase. I would go so far as to say, like, what if we did this? What if we said no exceptions for the cycle? Like, you don't get it in for the date. That's it.
We have to tell that the policy is going to be more strict than usual rather than saying blanket, just like what Jordan was telling me before, right? So
yeah. All of this said, we need to speed towards consensus. We need to make a decision. We need to message that as soon as possible. So what are the things that we are, like right now, right this second, what are the things that we're not happy with?
just pick the 11th versus 18th. If we make that decision, I think we'll be good.
I mean, to me, the 18th is the only reasonable choice because it has a month buffer. Like, like I know someone will merge something on the 19th that they haven't worked at all on, so they're gonna need at least a month to do it. You know, like the way I do my prep work for this is I won't write a KEP until I've already like implemented the feature, because to me, like you can't write the KEP without actually knowing it's gonna work. So I'll just go off and like go make it, and then I'll go write the KEP being, all right, here's all the crap I noticed, by the way. Here's all the crap that's gonna happen when you try to implement this. And that obviously is not what most people do. So I'm not worried about these dates. I can have a PR ready in like a week after my KEP merges. That's fine, but that's not.
But the others, we know from last year's cycle, Claire got a lot of pushback. Like enhancements freeze was right before the long weekend. Code freeze came pretty quick after in June, and it was a short period plus a holiday.
Yeah, I mean, I think since we're extending code, I think the 18th is reasonable, even though it's a little more time, which we're trying to not encourage more content. But we have already we're pushing out the back end substantially more than that. So I personally don't see that as a problem.
Okay, so that brings us down to 5 weeks, I guess, right? 5 weeks at the back half post code freeze, which is good. Like if we can shorten that period to master reopening, I like that. Are we cool with maybe saying that now that enhancements freeze is even further extended, are we cool with saying no exceptions? No? Tim says no.
You can't have any absolute policies. What if something horrendous, like, I mean, it's enhancement, but like, I don't know. I think that stating we'll be very, very strict about enhancements is.
Taylor in the back of his head can be imagining right now quietly, I will make no exceptions. We have a normal policy. We have a normal way of people justifying that their thing needs an exception. And it's always been completely subjective on the lead how they choose to manage the risk of their release. And we've allowed a lot. This time we're liable to allow less because we're worried, but with this change in cycle, we may actually feel like, wow, this thing is, everybody's heard the message. This is the most stable release we've ever had as we're sitting at the beginning of July. And maybe a few things do get let in.
So I wanted to ask, this is like a general question about enhancements freeze overall. Like, does it make sense to have like a enhancements freeze like soft and hard, like the soft being like this is the actual deadline, and after this you must now ask for an exception, and that next week is when you like, that's the gate. Like
we used to do that with code freeze.
Exactly.
And there was code slush. It was just a optimistic aspirational, like, hey folks, start doing less. And
No, like what I'm
it
saying is
didn't
you have a
quite work.
freeze and that's the actual date, and the policy is for a exception. Your exception cannot extend greater than a week.
And
Right?
that's
Like,
already kind of where we are pragmatically. There's exceptions that are filed well in advance of the date, the specific date, probably get a better time than ones that are filed the day after, but ones that are filed the day after the deadline may also still come in depending. And especially right now, I think we'd want to be a little bit affiliative on that. Like, oh crap, this whole week my family's been sick, but my thing has been sitting here ready. I've just not been here. What do y'all think? I'd like to think we'd be like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, no new deadlines, please. It's
that's
something.
fair. You guys have experience. I will trust you guys to.
It's one more. Like the deadlines we have today. It's one more thing for someone to smash against and miss, and like we have to manage that anyway. So yeah, I think okay, all right. I think we're good. Are we good? I think we're good. Okay. So let me pull
Now
the
you
stuff.
can send it out and let 20,000 people bike shed.
Like, remember that email we sent yesterday? Just kidding.
Yeah, I guess
Don't tweet
as
it
a
first.
process.
I waited until after the email was sent to tweet it.
Sorry, Mo.
Or you
I had
put
to
like
get that in.
important must read at the beginning of the subject line.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it was action required, where the action was like, please, can you read it? Please, can you read this?
So I wanted to ask overall in like terms of process, like are we just gonna say here's the new dates, or are we saying you have a few days to provide us feedback asynchronously because you can't all attend the SIG release meeting?
That's
If
what
you
we're
send
going
this out,
for.
this is relative to a PR, lazy consensus by Friday or Monday, something like that. Chime in on the PR, folks, please.
Yeah. I mean, the what I was saying before, like we have to go with it, and we have to set a date, and we have to be able to message this out again. So yes, all of that. I will update the PR. I will shoot an email update. Is there anything outside of the changes to those dates that we wanted to discuss, or that we want to message in that email?
I would just ask again to have like every other sentence be like, hey folks, let's try and dial down what we aim to do and be human.
Yeah, do let
The
Agreed.
thing I think would be good to call out is the categories of people that we're trying to support and help, because if you're like a core contributor, the schedule might not make sense because you're not necessarily in the mindset of an end user who's trying to like not drop out of support or keep up with the bleeding edge because that's what people pay you money for. Like, I think there's a lot of target demographics for consuming our code and working on our code, and that might not be apparent to someone who's just in one of those buckets.
Sounds good. All right.
119, the have more empathy release.
Now it's EQ.
And on that note, I really appreciate everyone taking the time, all of the SIG chairs, technical leads, all the contributors that have taken time to hash this out with us. Emails coming soon, PR updates coming soon, and we will catch you at the next one. Take it easy.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Thank you.